The glass doors of Obsidian didn't swing open for just anyone. They opened because men with earpieces moved first, scanning the room, pressing fingers to their ears, nodding once. Then came the stillness, the kind that swept through a crowded restaurant the way a cold front moves through a city. Silent, total, and impossible to argue with. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chopsticks paused over bowls. A sommelier froze with a bottle tilted at 45 degrees. Wine hovering at the lip, going nowhere. Kong Jaiwan walked in like he owned the floor beneath his feet, because he did. He was 34, with the kind of face that could have belonged to a film star if fate had been more generous and less cruel. Strong jaw. Dark eyes that absorbed light rather than reflected it. A black suit that cost more than most people earned in 3 months, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been grown on his body rather than sewn. He moved through the restaurant the way water moves through stone, not violently, but with the absolute certainty that it would get where it was going. His associates trailed behind him at a respectful distance. Nobody made eye contact. The maitre d' nearly tripped over himself, leading them to the private booth in the back, the one that was never listed on the reservation system, the one that was always available. Kong Jaiwan sat down, unbuttoned the single button of his jacket, and looked at the room. He was used to this, the stillness, the fear dressed up as courtesy, the deference that moved through the air like a current whenever he entered a space. He was used to being the most dangerous thing in any room he walked into. He had built that reputation deliberately, the way architects build load-bearing walls, necessary, invisible to the untrained eye but holding everything up. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. He was simply present, the way predators are present. Fully, quietly, and with total awareness of every exit. That was when she arrived at the table. She moved with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. Her uniform was neat, her hair pulled back cleanly. She set down a small dish of banchan without any ceremony, pulled a notepad from her apron pocket, and looked directly at him. "Are you ready to order?"
No pause. No flique.
No catch in the breath. Kong Jaiwan looked at her. In 15 years of being the most feared man in Seoul's underground, he had watched people react to him in dozens of ways. Panic, flattery, false confidence, genuine terror dressed up as calm. He could read them all. He had cataloged them the way a naturalist catalogs species. This woman, she wasn't performing calm. She simply was calm. There was a difference, and he felt it immediately, like a wrong note in a familiar song. "Bring me whatever the chef recommends," he said. She wrote it down. "Anything else? Water. Still or sparkling?" "Still." She nodded once, took the menu, and walked away at exactly the same pace she had arrived. One of his men, Tae-sung, leaned slightly forward. "Should I find out who she is?"
No.
The single syllable dropped into the silence like a stone. Tae-sung leaned back. Kong Jaiwan watched her cross the restaurant floor and disappear through the kitchen doors. He had not been looked at like that, like nothing, in a very long time. The food came. It was excellent. He barely tasted it. Before they left, Kong Jaiwan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew an envelope. Thick, the kind of thickness that didn't require explanation. He left it on the table beside the empty water glass. She returned to clear the table and found it. He was almost at the door when he heard her voice. "Excuse me." He stopped. Not because he was asked to. Kong Jaiwan did not stop because he was asked to, but because no one had ever said those two words to him in that particular tone. Flat, businesslike, without apology or appetite. He turned. She was holding the envelope. "You left this," she said. "I know. I'm returning it." A beat of absolute silence spread through the nearby tables. The maitre d' had gone pale. Even Tae-sung had stiffened. Kong Jaiwan studied her face for the long calculation of 3 seconds. Then he said, "I don't do that." "Do what?" "Leave things by accident." She looked at the envelope, then back at him. "I don't need your money, and I don't scare easily." She set it down on the hostess stand with the same unhurried motion she used for everything else. "Have a good evening." She walked back toward the kitchen. He stood at the door of his own restaurant in his own city, watching a woman in a service uniform walk away from him, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he did not know what to do with his hands. He left without the envelope. He did not think about the woman at Obsidian for the rest of that day. He tried not to, which was different. In 15 years of building his empire, Kang Jaiwon had developed a reliable method for handling things that didn't fit. He filed them mentally, cross-referenced with everything he already knew about human behavior, then shelved. A person who surprised you was just a person you hadn't read correctly yet. A situation that confused you was just a situation you needed more data on. He had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with enough information and enough patience. He was halfway through a meeting with 3 of his lieutenants, a conversation about a supply route compromise in Incheon, when he realized he had stopped listening. The men were still talking. He was still nodding. But somewhere behind his eyes, a woman in a service uniform was setting an envelope down on a hostess stand and walking away. He had left something behind. That had never happened before. "Repeat that," he said. One of his men, Tae-sung, blinked. "Sir, the last thing you said. Repeat it." Tae-sung repeated it. Kang Jaiwon processed it, gave the correct instruction, and the meeting moved on. But he looked at his hands once, briefly, and thought of the door. He thought about her for 4 days straight, which he would not have admitted to anyone alive. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He had enemies in 12 districts who monitored his weaknesses for sport. A woman who didn't react to him was either trained, connected, or hiding something, and any of those 3 options was information he needed. He told Tae-sung to find out who she was. Tae-sung returned in 18 hours, which was faster than expected. Her name is Beatrice Kojo, 8 months at Obsidian. Before that, a smaller restaurant in Mapo. Before that, a pause. The particular pause of a man choosing his words. She moved around. 2 years, approximately. Busan, Jeju, briefly Osaka. Doing what? We don't know exactly. Kang Jaiwon looked at him. In his organization, we don't know was the kind of answer that ended careers. Tae-sung held the eye contact, which meant he had already tried everything standard and come up empty. She has no family in Seoul, Tae-sung continued. Parents deceased. 1 younger brother, whereabouts unclear. No partner. No connections to any operation we know of. So she's either clean or very good at disappearing. Yes, sir. Kang Jaiwon turned back to the window. Clean people didn't move between 3 cities in 2 years for no reason. Clean people had family and rent and the ordinary gravity of a life in one place. Something had happened in those 2 years. Something that had reshaped her into a person who served Kang Jaiwon a glass of water without her hands shaking. Leave her alone, he said. Don't go near her. He went back to Obsidian 3 days later anyway, because he was apparently incapable of following his own instructions where this woman was concerned. She served him again. Same pace. Same steady hands. Same complete absence of performance. He left a card with his number. The kind of gesture that had never needed to be explained before, because every previous recipient of it had understood immediately what it meant and what it cost to ignore. She sent it back through the maitre d' the following morning, in the same envelope, resealed. He sat with it in his office for a very long time. Not angry. Something harder to name than angry. He came back to the restaurant. He didn't sit in the private booth. He sat where he could watch her work. He told himself this was reconnaissance. She was good at her job in a way that had nothing to do with performance. She remembered orders for tables of 6 without writing them down. She de-escalated a drunk at the bar in 5 sentences and no raised voice, and when she pushed through the kitchen doors she smiled at the staff with an ease she never turned on for customers. A different smile. Warmer. It made something in him go very still, because it was evidence of something he had suspected and hadn't wanted confirmed. She wasn't performing indifference with him. She was genuinely, specifically indifferent to him, while being fully present for everyone else. He had been assessed by Beatrice Kojo, and found unworthy of warmth. He sent gifts, a set of professional-grade knives. This was rational, he was trying to find a response. Everyone had one. The knives were donated to a culinary school for at-risk youth within 48 hours. He found out because a student came to thank the anonymous donor. Curiosity, he thought. That's all this is. He sent a book she'd apparently mentioned wanting. It ended up on the staff break room table with a note. For whoever wants it. The curiosity started to feel like something else. He didn't examine it. He arranged a reservation at a restaurant she'd told a colleague she wanted to try. The maitre d' used it for his anniversary dinner. Kang Jaiwon sat with the reports spread across his desk and stayed very still. He had broken people with less effort than this. He had dismantled organizations, redirected loyalties, rebuilt men from the inside out. He had never sent 3 gifts to the same woman and received 3 variations of no. thank you. He had not, in 15 years, wanted anything that wanted nothing back. That was the vertigo. Not failure, he'd had failures before, understood them, absorbed them. This was the specific terror of engaging with a force you cannot map. He didn't know what she wanted. He didn't know what she feared. He didn't know the thread he could pull. For the first time since he was 17 years old, he had no thread. The third time he came to the restaurant, he didn't sit in the private booth. He sat at the bar, which was unusual enough that his own staff spent the first 10 minutes in a low-grade panic trying to determine if something was wrong. She was working the bar section that night. She came over without hesitation and set down a cocktail napkin. What would you like? Sit down. I'm working. I own this restaurant. She looked at him, not with defiance, but with something more unsettling. Patience. As if she were waiting for him to say something more interesting. Then you know the bar staff doesn't sit with customers during service. Is there something I can get you? Or would you like to speak with the manager? He almost laughed. Almost. Why aren't you afraid of me? She was quiet for exactly 1 second. Would fear help either of us right now? It would make things simpler. For you, maybe. She picked up her pen. Drink. He ordered whiskey. She poured it precisely. He watched her hands and they were completely steady. Everyone wants something, he said, when she set the glass down. What do you want? She met his eyes. Peace, she said. And right now you're standing in the way of it. She nodded at the room, which had gone completely, unnaturally quiet again. You're making my other customers uncomfortable. She walked to the other end of the bar. He sat with his whiskey in the silence of a room full of people afraid to breathe, and something happened to him that he did not have a name for yet. His enemies noticed the change before he did. It was Shin Doyoung, a rival with operations in Gangnam and ambitions significantly larger than his capabilities, who first observed that Kang Jae-won had been distracted, less punctual with decisions, more willing to delegate, less terrifying in rooms. He's got a woman, Shin Doyoung told his lieutenant, Park Hyun-woo, over drinks that tasted more expensive than they were. A specific woman, which means a specific vulnerability. Park Hyun-woo, who was more cautious and therefore would live longer, said, That's not confirmed. Find her, Shin Doyoung said. The way men say things when they have already decided and are merely narrating. They found her within a week. Beatrice Kojo was walking home on a Tuesday night, a route she had taken hundreds of times, through streets she knew by texture and sound, when she noticed the car. It was parked across from her building, engine idling. Different car, same position the following Thursday. She said nothing to anyone. She changed her route. She was careful without being alarmed, methodical without being afraid. Whatever she had been through in those 2 years of moving between cities had apparently included a working education in noticing when she was being followed. On the third Thursday, it wasn't a car. It was 2 men on foot, half a block back, not good enough at this to be professionals but good enough to be a message. She stopped walking. She turned around and looked at them directly, for 5 full seconds, until they stopped, looked at each other, and the calculation on their faces shifted from threat to unease. Then she took out her phone, took a clear photograph and walked home. She was 3 steps from her front door when someone grabbed her arm from the alley beside the building, hard, yanking her sideways, the kind of grab that meant business, that meant she was now in a different category of situation entirely. She had exactly enough time to slam her elbow backward into the man's face before the alley filled with light. It was over in less than 90 seconds. Kang Jae-won's people had been watching her for 11 days. Not because he had ordered them to. He had explicitly not ordered anyone to watch her, which was itself a kind of order to Tae-sung, who had served his boss long enough to understand what unsaid things meant. So they had watched. And when the threat became physical, they had intervened with the quiet efficiency of a surgical team. She was sitting on the steps of her building, breathing steadily, when Kang Jae-won arrived. He stepped out of the car and walked toward her, and she looked up at him with an expression that was not relief, not gratitude, and absolutely not fear. Your people, she said. It was not a question. Yes. And the men in the alley will not be a problem. She looked at him for a long time. You could have told me I was in danger. I didn't know how serious it was until tonight. You could have told me anything. Her voice was level, but something moved beneath it. Not anger exactly. Closer to exhaustion. Did it occur to you to just talk to me? It occurs to me now. She stood up. She was not trembling. She was not undone. She looked him directly in the face, and what she said next landed like a stone through glass, clean and irreversible. You didn't save me because you care, she said. You did it because you can't control me, and you couldn't stand the idea that someone else might. The silence that followed had a texture to it. His two nearest men were 20 feet away and might as well have been on another planet. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He couldn't find the words because the words didn't exist because she wasn't wrong. She went inside. The lock engaged. He stood on the steps of her building for much longer than he would ever admit. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse in the dark, without the city's noise because the windows were triple insulated, in a silence so complete it had the quality of pressure. He sat with her words. You did it because you can't control me. In his world, this was a flaw. Weakness was a target. Attachment was leverage. Every man who had ever been undone in Kang Jaiwon's presence had been undone through something he loved, something he needed, something he was afraid to lose. The operating principle of his entire existence was that you do not give anyone that kind of access to you. You do not have a soft center. You do not let anything matter enough to be used against you. He had watched this principle applied to other men with the cold clarity of someone who had learned it young and never unlearned it. And now, sitting in his dark apartment at 2 a.m, he understood, with the kind of understanding that bypasses the rational mind and lands somewhere older and less manageable, that he had already broken his own rule. Not because she had done anything to make him. Not because she had wanted to. She had, in fact, actively resisted it. He had done it entirely to himself. He found out anyway. Not through investigation. She told him. A week after the alley, he came to the restaurant and sat at a regular table in her section, during the quiet hour between lunch and dinner, and when she came over he said, I'm not here to eat. I came to say I'm sorry. She looked at him for long enough to make clear that she was deciding whether the apology meant anything. Then she sat down in the chair across from him. Just for a moment, just enough to make the conversation equal. I know who you are, she said. I knew the first night. I know. I stayed calm because... She stopped. Started again. When I was 26, my brother got involved with people like you. Different city. Different names. Same structure. She folded her hands on the table. I spent 2 years trying to get him out. It didn't work. And I learned something in those 2 years that I didn't know before. What? That fear is a choice. Not always. But sometimes. She looked at him levelly. I chose not to be afraid of you, because I've already seen what men like you look like when everything falls away. And it turns out you look like everyone else. The honesty of it hit him somewhere that wasn't accessible from outside. Some interior room he had long ago shut off and declared unnecessary. Men like you think power is everything, she said. But I've seen what happens when it disappears. He sat with that for a moment. And what does happen? He asked. You find out who you actually are. She stood up. That's the part that scares most of you. She went back to work. He sat at the table and did not move for a long time, and for the first time since he was 17 years old, Kang Jaiwon was not the most dangerous thing in the room. Shin Doyoung did not give up. The attack on Beatrice Kojo had been a probe, not a conclusion. What followed was escalation. A series of moves designed not to harm her directly, but to communicate to Kang Jaiwon that she was accessible. Cars outside the restaurant. A package delivered to her address that contained nothing threatening but proved they knew where she lived. A phone call to Obsidian where the caller asked for her by name, left no message and hung up. Each one landed on Kang Jaiwon's desk like a lit match. His organization mobilized. Resources were repositioned. People were put on Shin Doyoung's operation around the clock. Kang Jaiwon ran the response with the cold precision that had built his empire. No emotion, no waste, every decision calibrated. He was excellent at this. He had always been excellent at this. But this time, underneath the efficiency, something was different. He called her. She picked up on the 4th ring. I need you to go somewhere safe, he said. For 2 weeks, maybe 3.
No.
Beatrice. I have a job. I have a life. I'm not going to disappear into one of your safe houses because you're in the middle of something. The something involves you. The something involves you. Her voice was even. I didn't ask to be in your life, Kang Jaiwon. You put yourself in mine. He pressed the phone harder against his ear and looked at the city through his window and felt, with absolute clarity, both how right she was and how little it changed anything. Then let me send someone to stay with you. Another pause. Longer. One person. she said. And they stay outside. He closed his eyes briefly. Agreed. She hung up without saying goodbye, and he stood there with the phone in his hand feeling something that had no useful function in his world whatsoever. 3 weeks later, Shin Doyoung's operation was in pieces. It had not been quiet, and it had not been clean, and it had cost Kang Jaiwon 3 alliances that he would need to rebuild slowly and carefully over the next 2 years. His reputation, always operating on a razor's edge between feared and untouchable, had shifted not toward weakness, exactly, but toward something. Men who had watched him for years saw something new in him and weren't sure how to categorize it. Power moved by unpredictability. Whatever he had become, he was still unpredictable. He found her after it was over. She was at the restaurant, the early shift, closing out the lunch service, stacking chairs with the particular purposeful motion of someone who preferred having something to do with their hands. He walked in and she looked up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Is it done? She asked. Yes. Are you all right? The question surprised him. He had been asked many things in the aftermath of conflicts, for decisions, for accountability, for reward, but not that. Not with that specific tone which held no transaction in it, no angle, just the plain interest of one human being in whether another had survived something intact. I don't know, he said, and it was the most honest answer he had ever given anyone. She nodded slowly, like the honesty counted for something. Do you want coffee? Yes. She put the chairs down and went to make it. She stayed in his life, but on her terms, which she made explicit and did not soften. She was not an accessory to his power. She was not a safe harbor he could return to after the work of being who he was, leaving that work at the door. If he came to her, he came as a person, not an institution. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than building an empire. Harder than holding it. Harder than every interrogation, every decision. Every morning he had gotten up and rechosen the life he had made. Being known, actually known, by someone who was not afraid of him and therefore had no reason to protect him from what she saw, was something his entire architecture had been built to prevent. You don't control me, she told him, one evening on her small balcony, looking out at a city that had no idea they were in it. You never will. He looked at her. I know, he said. She turned to look at him and something in her face. Not softness exactly, but a kind of openness she didn't offer easily. Made space for the rest of what he was going to say. I stopped trying, he said. Somewhere. I stopped trying. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. Not that sweet. Not I'm proud of you. Just good. Like a door opening 1 measured inch. He sat with that. The city moved below them. Indifferent and enormous. Full of a million transactions and fears and hungers that Kang Jaiwon had spent his entire life cataloging and exploiting and navigating. He had built an empire on the principle that everyone had a pressure point. That everyone, given the right circumstances, could be reduced to whatever they were most afraid of losing. He looked at Beatrice Kojo in the quiet evening light and understood, in the deep and inconvenient way of things that are true, that he was no longer the man who had walked into Obsidian on that first night believing that. She had not broken him of anything. She had not saved him or healed him or fixed whatever was fractured in the machinery of who he was. She had simply refused calmly, completely without cruelty, to validate the premise that control was the same thing as power. And perhaps the question worth sitting with, long after this story ends, is this. When a person spends their whole life building walls strong enough to keep the world out, and then meets someone who doesn't bother to knock, who simply stands on the other side and waits, who is the one who is truly free? And if that person finally opens the door, are they choosing courage? Or are they just choosing a different kind of surrender? If this story made you feel something, subscribe, leave a comment below, and turn on notifications so you never miss when I post a new video. And if you enjoyed it, hit like. It helps more than you know.